Welcome back to Michael Morpurgo's Kaspar, Prince of Cats. It's in the Southam again, and this is Chapter 2. So let's go. Chapter 2. Not Johnny Trot at all. I never had a mother, nor a father come to Nat, nor any brothers or sisters. None that I know of, anyway. Not that I haven't ever felt sorry for myself. The truth is, you don't miss what you've never had. But you do wonder. As a small boy growing up in the orphanage in Islington, I often used to try and imagine who my mother was, what she looked like, how she dressed, how she spoke. For some reason, I never much bothered about my father. I must have been about 9 years old and on my way back from school one day, walking down Tollington Road, when I saw a fine lady passing in a carriage. The carriage happened to stop right by me. She was dressed in all black, and I could see she'd been crying. I don't know why, but I smiled at her and she smiled back. At that moment, I was sure she was my mother. Then the carriage moved on and she was gone. For months afterwards I dreamed about her, but as the memory of that moment faded, so did the dream. I had other imaginary mothers, of course. Excuse me. They didn't have to be posh or rich, but I certainly didn't want to believe that my mother might be down on her hands and knees scrubbing someone's doorstep, her nose and hands red and raw with the cold. Above all, my mother had to be beautiful. She couldn't be too old and she couldn't be too young. She mustn't have children. It was essential to me that I was the only child, and of course she would have had to have fair hair, because I had fair hair. It was natural then, I suppose, that within a few days I had quite made up my mind that Countess Kandinsky fitted the bill perfectly. She was fair-haired, supremely beautiful, and elegant, and about the right age to be my mother, and so far as I could tell, childless. So if she was my mother, it followed that I had to be a Russian count or prince. I didn't mind which one. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea, and the more I daydream about it. I would lie awake in my little attic room, up on the servants' corridor, where the room leaked and the water pipes gurgled and groaned, and I'd dream, knowing, of course, that it was probably all nonsense, but believing it in just enough for me to be able to enjoy it all the same. Thinking back, I'm sure it was this silly fantasy, as much as my cat-minded duties, that made me look forward so much to visiting the Countess's room while she was at rehearsals. I went up there every possible opportunity, as often as I could manage, without my absence in the lobby being noticed. I was always up and down in the lift, carrying luggage, and each time I'd just slip away for a minute or two and check on Kaspar. Mr. Freddy noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "What have you been up to, lad?" he asked me once when I came back down. "Nothing," I told him with a shrug. "Well, one day," he said, "maybe that nothing will get you into a whole lot of trouble with Skullface, so you'd better watch your step." I knew Mr. Freddy wouldn't snitch on me. He wasn't like that. Usually I'd find Kaspar sitting on the bedroom window, watching the barges streaming by on the river, or sometimes he'd be curled up asleep in his chair in the sitting-room. Either way, he'd hardly deign to give me a second glance until the food was in a bowl, and until he decided he was ready for it. Those first few days I felt he was treating me in much the same way as most of the guests who came to the Savoy, with a certain cold disdain. I wanted to like him and be liked by him, but he kept his distance. I wanted to stroke him again, but I didn't dare, because he made it perfectly clear by the way he looked at me that he didn't want me to. I did dare talk to him, though, probably because he couldn't answer me back. I would crouch beside him as he lay in his chair, cleaning himself after his meal, and I'd tell him how my name was not Johnny Trot at all, but Count Nicholas Kandinsky, the Tsar of Russia, the Tsar of Russia was called Nicholas. I knew that, so I thought the name would be fine for me. I told Kaspar that I was in fact the long-lost son of the Countess, that she had come to London to look for me, and that therefore I was to be treated with a greater respect, even if he was a prince, and that anyway there wasn't much difference between a prince and a count. He'd listen for a while to my fantastical ramblings, but he'd soon tire of them, break into a great roaring purr, close his eyes, and go to sleep. But then, after only a few days, he surprised me by jumping up to sit on my lap after he'd finished his meal. I dared to hope that at last he was beginning to treat me as an equal, that he must have believed my story, after all, that we might now be friends. So I stroked him. Clearly I presumed too much. Kaspar sank his claws into my knee just to remind me who the prince was, then sprang off my lap and went to the window, where he sat deliberately ignoring me, swishing his tail with quiet satisfaction, and watching the barges on the river. I went to stand by him, to try and make it up to him. "And I love you too," I told him. I said it sarcastically, but even as I was saying it, I knew I really did mean it. He was an ungrateful, supercilious creature, and not at all endearing in any way. Yet, despite all this, I loved him, and I wanted him to love me too. There was moments when, if I'm honest, I relished Kaspar's aristocratic aloofness. Twice a day, during my work breaks, I'd take him out for a walk. We went to the park down by the river, but to get to the park I had to walk Kaspar on his lead from the lift all the way across the lobby to the front door. I swear that Kaspar knew perfectly well that everyone was looking at him, admiring him. He certainly knew how to put on the style, stepping out all high and mighty like the prince of cats he was, his tail waving majestically. Did I feel proud? Mr. Freddy would doff his cap to us as we passed by. There was some mockery in the gesture, I knew, but there was something else too. Mr. Freddy knew class when he saw it, and Prince Kaspar was class. He left no one in any doubt about that. Even the dogs in the park knew it. One withering look from Kaspar, and any notions they might have had of the prospect of a good cat chase withered away instantly. Tail between their legs, they would bark at us, but only from a safe distance. Kaspar made it plain that he simply despised them, and then ignored